So it's obvious from my bio that I'm the one to speak about these issues with all the scientific and public health background. But anyway, I want to thank Muslimish, Abdullah, Wissam, Zerar, and everybody for not giving up on inviting me every year on your conference, even though I have a little bit of a different opinion. I'm going to blow some of your assumptions that people consider your opinions as something that always high up. So you know that I disagree with you all the time. So that's something that I think is healthy within Muslimish, and I'm glad that it's available here. I won't be doing scientific slides like you are, so even though it's, I would lean towards such types of presentations, but I won't do that. Luckily, I didn't have much time to develop slides, so I will not bore you with many slides on that front. Actually, Zerar was nagging on the slides until yesterday, and I'm not sure what that is. But he was not rigid enough to stand on having the slides, and he was flexible, and he focused on what's the objective, which is communication, and he didn't fall hostage about having slides as something as sacred, which is, I think sacred is a very important word that I think is relevant to the topics that we're discussing here. On the other side, for example, in many places that I work in, whether in academia or even the private sector, slides are very sacred now. People have to have slides. And it's a very important means of communication. If you don't have slides, then you should not be able to communicate. And, they're holding it very sacred, and they're very rigid. And if you don't do those slides, then you don't belong. You have to, belong to the group, and it's a very righteous mentality that slides is the way to go forward. I'm going to take you a little bit into historical snapshots of my experience with criticizing ideas within Islam. And I like that term, Iman, that you mentioned. Debating and criticizes ideas within Islam, and having that critique mind and questioning, so that we would avoid that problem that our friend here was mentioning, that when he had that debate about the situation of women in Islam, he had that pushback. And probably the pushback is because of that feeling of sacredness and belonging, and you don't touch something that is very sacred to us. And that, of course, has to do with not being able to critique and question. So that's a very important element. So going back historically into some of the snapshots, so I was in medical school, and those who are in the Middle East know that usually medical schools have the most conservative and fundamental religious groups. Engineering and medical school, these are where they house the Muslim Brotherhood and the others and so on. So we get exposed for 7 full years to those. I would consider friends, because I disagree with you that they are not terrorists. Maybe there's a definition of the Muslim Brotherhood as a terrorist organization or not, but those belonging there, I cannot frame them as terrorists, all of them. So I know and still know many of them, and I don't count them as all terrorists. There are some of them who think in a very extremist way, but there are many of them that actually do not fall into that bucket. But anyway, exposure to them during medical school, that was also my first exposure about that issue of sacred ideas. How you pray, your position when you're praying, how your foot should be positioned when you finish your prayers, which hand is in front of which hand, is your hand on your side or on your up there, how do you wash? Do you wash your elbow before your hand? And for me, it was really strange that, given that we're in such science schools where rationale is the main way of thinking, that actually, so those are supposed to be the scientists of the future. That's actually how they approached many of the sacred ideas within Islam, and that gave me lots of questioning there, of course. So they also behaved in that authoritarian manner. They felt that they held a higher moral ground. They told me what's right and what's wrong. They refused to accept different views. Maybe they were tolerant for the first 5 or 10 minutes, and then that became a little bit irritating for them. And that, I must admit, it took me time to start questioning that, because also I felt the belonging. I felt the belonging within that group of very nice people. They're very righteous. They feel righteous. So that sense of belonging, kept me tied to them, and it took me quite a bit of time to start, disentangling that attachment. Now, moving forward, many years after, in 2011, we had in our region the Arab Spring, the revolution, the Arab Spring, and what we hold so dearly, at least many of us, and definitely the younger generations, the younger ones, they definitely hold highly and respect the 2011 revolution. But that also put people into some questions. So the question in many instances that I had, for example, given that I supported the revolution, those who held back to supporting Mubarak in the case of Egypt, the question that came back to me, do you love the army? Are you questioning that the army would do anything wrong? Are you against having our national order and nationalism and being Egyptian? Are you against that? When Morsi, the Muslim Brotherhood president, was speaking about the Ummah rather than Egypt, so that was a big thing. How can he speak anything besides Egypt and the country? So they held certain concepts very, very sacred, and they refused that you would even question anything about the army and about what they're doing, even though there were data that said that actually what they called virginity tests were done by the army, and other horrible things in terms of killings and otherwise. However, still, people held them in a very, very sacred position, and they did not allow for any sort of questioning.
That's life.
Yes. and to cheat you, I'm making into animated into different. So, yes. So anyway, so what I'm going to is that holding certain principles and holding certain institutions and holding certain ideas sometimes becomes sacred to different people, not necessarily just with the religious people, and they all share the same characters that we fear: authoritative, holding a higher moral ground, intolerant to other views, can't see any virtues to the others, and everything is for them is untouchable, at least what they believe in, whether it's the army, whether it's the Quran, whether it's religion, whether it's the ideas and so on. It's that holding something very sacred to their minds and heart. Now, also moving few years after what we call the revolution got defeated by and the old guard took over, people who believed much into in the revolution started having the revolution as a sacred actually thing, including ourselves. I refused anybody to criticize the revolution. I refused anybody to criticize our positions in 2011, and I did not want to review if did we do something wrong or not wrong in 2011 that led to the defeat of the revolution and the old guard coming back. So again, that aspect of holding things in a sacred way. And I'm borrowing here a term by Jonathan Haidt. He would say, morality binds and blinds. So when you hold to that aspect of sacredness and morality, it blinds you in many instances. And that feeling of belonging into a higher moral group gets you into that fixation of that you start pushing back and fighting the same way like the colleague was asking about the women's situation, and they pushed back against them. And that start of worshipping and circling about something that is sacred and holding it very, very, very dear. And maybe even slipping to that mentality of rigidness where, if you disagree with me, you're heretic, you're not Egyptian, you're not nationalist, you're blasphemous, there is no dialogue, and even to the extent of punishing, which is actually happening, at this stage. Not just against those who are against religion, it's happening those even who are, with liberal views and, against religion. They are even also being persecuted and imprisoned and killed in many of countries in the Middle East. So what I'm trying to arrive at is that we had those examples of early on that Abdullah, you made Islam al-Bahiri and Nasr Hamad Abu Zaid. Yes, of course they persecuted. But would we say they and of course they were persecuted because of their opinions against Islam and many of the Islamic ideas. But what about Adnan Khashoggi in the Turkish consulate? Was he also killed and persecuted because of his Islamic opinions? Or was he killed and persecuted because of those fundamentalist mentality of holding things sacred, whether it's religion, or whether it's a country, or whether it's a flag, or anything? Human beings tend to have the capacity to make things sacred, whether it's a rock, a tree, a flag, a country, a book, or otherwise. The other aspect is, I think there's a mix here. So I'm not at all saying that ideas should not be debated. On the contrary, we should debate ideas, and we should, question and ask and challenge. What I'm against is bashing religion and bashing those who hold to the religion, because I don't think that a world without religion is a better world. I don't think if we erase tomorrow religion, that the world peace is going to be spread all over the world, and there won't be some other entity or institution that is sacred that people will be killing each other for. I think it's the issue of that fundamentalist mentality, whether that fundamentalist mentality is towards a flag, a country, an institution, a book, a religion, or whatever. That's where the battle is. The battle is not against religion, but the battle is about harnessing a critical mind and having people think and question. I think that's the problem that we're having, all over the world, but specifically in the Middle East, of course. We raise generations and generations of people who do not question. And that gets exemplified, whether standing in a very extremist way, holding on to religion, or a very extremist way now, holding on to nationalism. And I get very worried stepping into the Cairo's airport in case some of my very close friends who hold nationalism to their heart have reported me somewhere because I'm a traitor. And I've had lots of those messages sent to me that I am a traitor. Again, because of that fundamentalist mentality. So I won't go much, again, I think it's that also aspect that we need to question. Are we also making scientific reasoning another sacred, untouchable way of addressing things? So, we should be aware that we don't also, where we started by trying to break off of that fundamental mentality of people around us, we don't end up slipping into being fundamental ourselves and be fundamentalist ourselves, and also holding a higher moral ground above others and saying, actually, we think what's right. We know the passage to freedom of speech and other ways of solving human problems, because actually there is lots of common ground with people who hold religion as a title to them that could serve the purpose of what we're supposed to be defining. What is our battle? What exactly is our battle? Is our battle erasing religion, or is our battle those ideas that Iman was mentioning that we need to correct? We need to have people question and ask. So that's where I'm going to be ending with that question. That, or actually, the answer is that fundamentalism is where the battle ought to be, and not necessarily religion, and help people be capable of reasoning and bridging that gap and finding where is it that we can have commonality with the other, and having one common platform and agree of where are we heading and head towards that. So I'll stop there and take any questions.